Welcome to the Navigating Business Decisions video series where I am explaining the findings in a report from an extensive survey that was done with Northeast Ohio business leaders. This is number 8 in a series, and my name is Grace LaConte. I am the founder of LaConte Consulting, and I collaborated with a group of students from Kent State University to create this survey, and I wanted to share our findings with you. So if you want to find the actual report or a 2-page summary in case the 64-page report is a bit much, you can visit laconteconsulting.com/Ohio-survey. So today I'm going to review the industry and regional comparisons. So what we did in this survey was not just collect information about how individual people make decisions, but also about their industry, their company size, their revenue level, and the region in which they live. Whether it was urban or rural. We looked at different factors that affect the decision within that industry, and then we kind of saw some correlations with how the business owners within those industries are making decisions similarly or differently. So this is a part of the report that talks about the differences between the 5 different industry sectors that we identified, and also, as you'll see later, some additional thoughts on the region. So, okay, let's start with, first of all, each industry is quite different in the way that they handle making decisions. And part of that's because of the very wide variety of situations that each industry faces, as well as the type of competitors that they may have, the chances that they have to make changes within their industry, the growth opportunities, the types of leaders that are drawn to it, as we looked at in the last video on gender differences. There are fewer females represented within the manufacturing industry leadership, at least in the data that we looked at. Males tend to take more risks when they're leaders than females, but female leaders tend to be more relational and empathetic. And so similarly, in an industry comparison, certain industries have a difference in how the leaders are making decisions and choices that affect their company within that industry. So the first one that we looked at was manufacturing and industrial. 34% of the companies we surveyed were within this sector. So of those companies, we had manufacturing as a whole, or different subcategories within that: industrial distribution, metal recycling, automotive, field services, energy, trade compliance, and environmental services. So what we found here is that the leaders who responded from these industries within the sector, they prioritize operational efficiency. It was very highly prioritized in their answers. Also cost control and long-term investments in capital. They often cared a lot about the supply chain management concerns within their sector and automation and opportunities, but also challenges and costs within automation. And then the need to mitigate operational risks, including, and most importantly, labor shortages for qualified skilled labor and fluctuating raw material prices. So these are the 2 things that had a big impact on how they would manage risks as they looked at decisions that would impact future outcomes. However, we found that many of these owners and leaders talked about data analytics as opportunities, whether they're currently using it or want to start using that, and also the Industry 4.0 technologies, which can make a huge difference in how their company is positioned against competitors, but also able to capitalize on speed and production value and quality as they serve customers who kind of start expecting that. So a quote here is, "We're constructing a new state-of-the-art manufacturing facility with enhanced automation and new technologies." That was one of our respondents in the manufacturing industry. The second sector is construction, real estate, and related services. So we had 8% of the companies that we surveyed were within this. So this was construction, real estate, landscaping, and security. So in this sector, there are challenges related to project management, regulatory compliance, and again, workforce constraints. And there was a special concern with fluctuating material costs, permitting delays, and subcontractor reliability, which can affect the speed at which they can make decisions. So this often had to do with risk management and contract negotiation to make sure that their financial picture could remain steady. So here's a quote from a construction business owner. Investing in hard assets like new equipment was critical. It has improved our throughput and quality, but labor shortages and turnover remain challenging. Then the third sector is consumer goods, food and beverage, and hospitality. 70% of companies that we serve are in this industry, and this includes retail, luxury retail, food and beverage, hospitality, jewelry, retail and sales, or service, and fitness. So this includes retail, including luxury retail, food and beverage, hospitality, jewelry, retail and service, and fitness. So in this sector, we found that there was a need to be highly responsive to consumer behavior. As you can imagine, when consumers start to listen to influencers, or when there is a new and exciting thing that's happening and everybody wants it, like the Stanley Cup, that becomes a very prioritized focus for consumers, and it's very important to adjust and respond to that behavior change from the consumer purchasing choices. Also, digital transformation. So this has to do with how much are they relying on digital information to have transactions and get data collected from purchases and deliver and that kind of thing. Supply chain optimization is also really important in these sectors. Data-driven decision-making is really important in this sector, especially for managing inventory, pricing appropriately with a strategy that can adjust based on market changes, and also making sure customers have an excellent experience with their brand. Often there are bottlenecks in decisions within this sector because it's hard to respond to market shifts, especially when it's a peak season. For example, some retailers have a very heavy holiday season, and then it kind of goes down in the first quarter of the next year. When there's an economic downturn and consumers are not as likely to purchase that kind of maybe products that they normally would in a higher economic situation, these can affect how a company within the sector would adapt. So here's from a retailer and hospitality owner. Our crisis management plan allowed us to quickly pivot to virtual offerings when we were forced to close during the pandemic. And another quote, we currently don't have a backup plan if key team members are unable to perform their roles simultaneously. So that's from retail or service owner. I would suggest that this is an important issue that can affect all industries. If you have information that's only available to certain key members of your team and not to anyone else, that puts you at huge risk if those particular members of your team are not available or cannot help to mitigate problems. If they take vacation, if they're not available, if they quit, if something bad happens, that information is then siloed in a part of the business that may not be salvageable if that person cannot help to solve those problems. So not just in retail. Then the fourth sector is financial, professional, and technology services. So this was 24% of our companies that we surveyed. And this includes financial services, insurance, consulting, IT and software, marketing, graphic design, and then marketing and display production. So within this, what drives decisions here is risk management, regulatory compliance, and technology adoption. And obviously there's a big difference in the different kinds of companies within the sector because it's kind of a broad sector. But financial services really like to look ahead to forecasting models and AI-driven analytics. Obviously, they would be more likely to look at very advanced financial models, and that kind of technology is more available in that sector to assess risks and optimize portfolios. And in contrast, technology and consulting firms prioritize really fast responses and quick innovation opportunities, agility and innovation to seek to make fast-paced decisions and pivot their strategies so that they can scale. In contrast, technology and consulting firms are looking more to agility and innovation as opportunities to look to strategize how they're going to move forward and grow and potentially scale. So it's just a slightly different way of looking at solving the problem within their industry. Tech leaders really like speed. So they need to identify opportunities for rapid growth or disruptive innovation more than in other sectors. And unlike in manufacturing, where risk is managed through gradual adjustments, tech leaders have to do the opposite. They have to take strategic risks to stay ahead of market trends in a slightly different way. So here's a quote by financial services owner: "Better financial planning is crucial for our clients, which is why we're hiring an additional trained expert." So it's a good thing to stay ahead of that curve, but not be so cash tight that you aren't able to get through difficult seasons. And then the final sector that we looked at was healthcare, arts, and personal services. So this includes healthcare facilities, arts and entertainment, and then media companies and beauty and personal services. So healthcare, again, these are a variety of things within one sector, but healthcare leaders are in a highly regulated industry. They have a very rapidly evolving series of problems to overcome, and they have to make decisions that are based on compliance, patient care, and operational efficiency. I personally have worked in the healthcare environment. There is so much changing, and they have to respond very quickly to compliance issues beyond what a lot of other industries are required to do. So this makes it very complex to make decisions. So because of the regulatory requirements, this leads to a need to make decentralized decisions, meaning that not everything can go through the top leadership. Only you have to kind of spread it out among middle managers or leaders, especially in a pandemic or in another crisis. That has to become decentralized. So this is actually a good lesson for any industry and any leader, really, that there are options to decentralize your decision making, especially in certain aspects of how your business is operating, meaning that you can delegate decisions of certain scopes or certain types of choices when it comes to approving customer requests under a certain dollar amount, or as long as it aligns with the company's goals and culture and values. There's a lot more speed that you can acquire from getting away from the bottleneck decision making at the very top and kind of allowing more leaders to choose to do those things within the scope of their role. Okay, so in contrast to healthcare, we have arts and personal services. So leaders in these industries really have to make decisions based on what is creatively changing in the culture of their industry, what customers or consumers are demanding, and what they can offer individually. So most of these companies that we surveyed in this sector were much smaller and had a lower revenue amount, but still had expertise that is valued because they do something differently than their competitors. So they really have to use more intuition and gut feeling, and also observe the market more carefully rather than having a longitudinal study with a lot of analytics, partly because maybe smaller companies, but also because it's just not as easy to look for trends when you're talking about quickly adapting to culture changes or creative needs. It's a totally different way of looking at decisions. So here's a healthcare clinic owner. We brought on a new provider without a guaranteed patient base. It was a calculated risk to meet growing demand, and it's starting to pay off as our capacity increases. And then from a fitness service owner, our crisis management plan is a team effort. Everyone is involved, so feedback from every department is valued and critical in successful execution. All right, so that's it for the industry comparisons. So next, we're going to just quickly go over regional comparisons. So this is just a quick analysis of the difference between large cities and urban centers, mid-sized cities, and then the rural communities. What are some differences that we found throughout that? So as I mentioned at the beginning of this series, we were able to hear from a variety of people throughout all of Northeast Ohio, and they represent 45% from urban centers such as Akron, Cleveland, and Youngstown, Warren, and Boardman. And then in the mid-sized cities, we've had 42% of our respondents from there. And small towns and rural communities, we had 13%. So that's a pretty good spread. It gives us a good sense of kind of some challenges within each of those areas. So we found that in large cities, leaders tend to benefit from being in large cities. They have more access to capital, to technology, and to more people that they can draw from in their talent pool. They just tend to be able to leverage more sophisticated tools for decision making, like predictive analytics, AI-driven insights, and just collaborate more with people who are kind of pushing the edge of that envelope when it comes to technology, just by virtue of being in a center that tends to have that more available. So urban leaders often manage diverse teams with varied expertise, and then they're able to kind of capitalize on innovation and strategic agility. But they also face some unique challenges, such as a lot of competition. People tend to want to move from city to city, so they don't always have the opportunity to keep their workforce only in that one place. They also have competition in terms of the industry, because there's just more to lose if a big competitor takes some of their client base. They also have rising operational costs because cities are becoming more, everyone's becoming more expensive, but it is just a higher price point to have things shipped, and overhead just tends to be higher. And rapid market shifts. If you're becoming very entrenched in this particular type of service or industry, product base, and then that shifts rapidly, it's really hard to steer the ship. And it can be very expensive. So because of this, decision-making processes can be more complex in an urban setting, and they might require leaders to balance their long-term investments with short-term market pressures. And this could be a really difficult thing to decide what to put off, what to adapt to quickly, and that's part of the joy of being a business owner, right? Is knowing what is most important to do now versus later. So in mid-sized leaders, a good portion of our respondents were in cities that are not tiny, but also not as big as the larger ones in the region. So these leaders have a balance in the opportunity and caution that they kind of have available to them. They have strong regional business networks. We did find several examples of networks that these owners are part of within the Northeast Ohio communities. They have moderate competition with other companies, and relatively stable workforce. So workers in these regions tend not to have as high of turnover. There's still turnover, and workforce is still an issue across all of these sectors and regions, but I think they tend to be more stable within mid-sized cities. So within these areas, they're more likely to blend, as I mentioned in a previous video, the data-driven strategies with relationship-based decisions. So they can utilize both the industry networks of people who are within their industry that can help, and technology to build connections. So they tend to have kind of the best of both worlds in some ways. Urban leaders tend to have more access and more opportunities for growth, but mid-sized city leaders tend to have more kind of stability and more moderate growth opportunities. In smaller cities, leaders may lack the resources that those metro areas have, but they do have lower costs generally, and they can manage the competitive landscape with their connections within those areas. And decisions focus on steady growth, market positioning, and balancing innovation with financial prudence or caution. Then we get to rural leaders. So this would be areas of Northeast Ohio that are quite far from an urban center. 13% of our respondents are from here. And these leaders are facing challenges with limited workforce. So fewer people live in rural areas. Thus, it is harder to get reliable employees when you are far away from a metro. You also have trouble with infrastructure, because sometimes rural areas don't get the amount of support and infrastructure funding that larger metro and medium-sized cities do. And also they just have a smaller market. It may be harder for them to ship or get customers when you are so far from other types of companies that you could collaborate with. So these can lead to a more cautious approach when it comes to making decisions, and they might emphasize sustainability over time. They want to stay in place. They want to minimize risks and leverage local networks for support and business continuity. And you are more limited in the resources that you have because you are so far from other metro areas. You tend to lock arms with your neighbors during a crisis. You tend to have more local support for challenges. So it does lead to a much different experience for business owners in the rural areas. So rural businesses can excel if they prioritize those deep community ties and personalized customer service. I did hear that several times in the survey, that is one thing that they provide better than their competitors in these other metro areas. And innovative resource management. They can be real creative when you do not have access to large city services. You get you find ways to get through it. And then in small towns, they may be slower to adopt new technologies than their city counterparts, but they can leverage practical innovations and find creative solutions to be to get as efficient as possible and still get outcomes that they're looking for. As I've mentioned several times, business owners don't always want the same thing. Most owners prioritize relationships and leaving a legacy, and not as much on just building wealth. That tends to be actually pretty low on the goals for most of the people that I work with. So when it comes to looking at options, even if you're in a rural area, there's some wonderful things you can still do to grow your business and do it in a way that's sustainable, but also reflects your values. And I think that's one thing that definitely came out from the survey, was that regardless of if you're in an urban, mid-sized, or rural area, there are really great ways to make the most of where your company is based. So I hope that's helpful. If you want more information, make sure to subscribe for more videos. You can check out my website, laconticonsulting.com/Ohio-survey. And I really appreciate you checking this out. Make sure to leave a comment, like this video if you want other people to see it, and I'll see you in the next video.